My name is Tatlı, and we have been hosting Belle in the Center for Research in Equality and Diversity for the last 9 days. And it has been a great pleasure. And thank you very much for Belle coming. So I'm going to do the formal thing now. Belle's talk today is entitled Diverse Spillovers and the Secondhand Smoke Effect, Understanding Racism Within and Outside the Workplace. She is a professor of management at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Her research focuses on mentoring, diversity, and positive relationships at work. Belle's research has been incredibly paradigm changing in the field of management and business research. She is the one, I think, who always swam against the tide, and I think the presentation that she's going to make today is another evidence of that, because she's not looking at how witnessing racism affects people, rather than just looking at the effects of experiencing racism yourself. So I think that's really, really important. Her work appeared in almost all of the top-tier elite business and management journals. Her work has been cited widely by all of us. She is the co-author of Mentoring and Diversity, an International Perspective, and she is also the co-editor of the Handbook of Mentoring at Work and Exploring Positive Relationships at Work. Belle has won numerous awards. I'm not going to list them because I know that you want to actually listen to her, not to me. But she has won a lot of awards, not only because of the outstanding contribution she made to the scholarship in the field of equality and diversity, but also because of how she moved our field and our relationships in academia in the direction of positive relationships. She is, anybody who met her would say that she is the best mentor in the world. So we are very, very lucky to have her here, and she did a great job here also mentoring a lot of people within the School of Business and Management in that very short space of time she has been with us. So I'm going to tell you some of the awards she won. So she won the Sage Lifetime Achievement Award for scholarly contribution to management, and the Academy of Management Mentoring Legacy Award, the Center for Creative Leadership Ulmer Research Award, and she is also the invited member of several professional associations, and I'm going to read them to you as well. So she's the invited member of the Society for Organizational Behavior, and she is a Fulbright Senior Specialist Scholar. She is also a fellow of the Society for Industrial Organization Psychology, the American Psychological Society, the Society for the Psychology of Women, the American Psychological Association, the Academy of Management. So she is a change agent. Okay, and she's currently the editor-in-chief of the Academy of Management Journal, and she actually has changed the face of that journal in terms of what is published there, and also in terms of the reviewing process and how she has supported developmental reviewing. A distinguished scholar, I'm reading this now, and a wonderful individual, Belle is a great source of inspiration and courage for her students and colleagues through her unceasing commitment to diversity, equality, and inclusion, and her advocacy for engaged scholarship. We are grateful for your presence here, Belle, with us. And so please join me in welcoming Professor Ragins.
Oh my God. Oh my God. In all my years, I've never gotten such a wonderful introduction and have never felt so welcome, so invited, such gracious hospitality. Thank you for inviting me to come. Thank you for making this visit so wonderful, for taking care of me in every way, and for hosting this amazing event. Can we have a round of applause for who? It's a lot of work to do this. It's a lot of work to do this. And thank you. Thank you for doing this. I am just so thrilled to be here today to talk about racism. Okay? Yeah, we oftentimes don't talk about racism. We don't talk about it enough. We don't think about it enough. But we have to talk about it, we have to think about it, and we have to understand it if we're going to change it. Right? So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. I'm going to be covering a little bit about different types of racism that emerges in the workplace and in the community. Then I'll be sharing a couple of studies that I've been doing, some empirical research that we've been doing. Don't worry, there won't be any structural equation modeling. I'm making it more for the general audience, just to kind of give you a cutting edge information about the kinds of work we're doing. And then we're going to end with implications, what organizations can do, and what we should do, what our personal responsibility is for doing. Right? Welcome, come on in. Don't worry about it. So we know that racism is alive and well. We know that. And sometimes when I think about racism, the image that comes to my mind is this: an iceberg. There's what you see. It could be the graffiti. It could be the hate crimes. It could be the behaviors. But then it goes much deeper. And sometimes you don't see the deepness until the water level starts to shift. But sometimes you see it right away. Okay? Here's some examples of things that you could see on the street. The top one says, "Go back to Africa, make America great again." Okay. So this is the very visual display of racism, but it goes much deeper than that. It goes much deeper. We see a spike in hate crimes. Okay, yeah, there's our friend. But after the Southern Poverty Law Center started tracking hate crime incidents, and after Donald Trump was elected, November 4th, there was a huge spike in hate crime incidents because the door was open, the floodgates were open. The iceberg lifted. You could see more of it. It's not just the US. You also see a spike in racist and religious offenses after the referendum. Right? Again, this phenomenon which, you know, you think, well, racism, surely we're in a post-racial society, surely racism is on decrease. Look at this, it's 2017, we're not in 1930 or 40. But then we see these things, and we know that it's still there, waiting for a reason to come to the foreground. So we have explicit racism, things that are very explicit. Right? The old photos and the new. But what's also insidious and what's also damaging is implicit racism. This is modern racism. We call it aversive racism. It's more covert. It's the subtle biases. It could be unconscious or subconscious, and the preference of white over black. The viewing of white as good, black as bad. The implicit association tests, the work that's been done at Harvard kind of illustrates this. We see the black guy, right? So explicit biases are expressed directly, but implicit are expressed indirectly. Explicit, you may be aware of it. Implicit, may not be aware of it. So example is, I like whites more than Latinos. That's an explicit bias, but implicit, sitting further away from a Latino. Not feeling comfortable, physically comfortable in the presence of someone who's different. So this is what we're dealing with. It's not just the explicit, it's the implicit. And then we have denial and backlash. In the US, you know, after Barack Obama was elected president of the US, we heard all these people going, we're post-racial now. See, we got African-American president. No more complaining about racism. Look at this. But then as the years went by, we saw such backlash and actually raised consciousness and awareness for many white people saying, wow, this is really something what we see going on here. And this is the kind of things that we see. Billboards, this is the US, billboards. It's not racist to love your people, white pride radio. Anti-racist is code word for anti-white. And then Rick Tyler, who ran for Congress in Tennessee in 2016, November 2016, had this billboard, "Make America White Again." Billboard. He also had billboards that were anti-Muslim, he had billboards that were anti-LGBT. And he proclaims himself to be a pastor. I'm religious. And in my heart, I love black people. Got to do a little bit better than that. And then I love this little cartoon. Racism? Heck, I totally forgot the president was even colored. Okay, here's this guy. And those are Confederate flags, okay? And the Confederate flag in the US is a sign for the South and slavery and all of this. So it's really, when you unpack that, it gets pretty deep. So you have this denial and you have this backlash that's happening too that we're dealing with. And then we have a race gap. This is a Pew Research Center recent report 2016. They asked whites and blacks, simple question, how are blacks treated in the US? Well, you'd think that whites and blacks would have somewhat different perceptions of how blacks are treated in the US, but look at those gaps. Okay, in terms of dealing with the police, 84% of African Americans said that blacks are treated less fairly than whites in dealing with the police, only 50% of whites. In the courts, 75 to 43. When applying for a loan mortgage, 66 to 25. In the workplace, 64% of blacks said, blacks are treated less fairly than whites in the workplace. Only 22% of whites saw that as a problem. 49 and 21, 43 and 20. Okay, so whites aren't seeing it. Maybe they don't want to see it. But there's this gap, and if the gap exists, then what does that mean for change? What does that mean for creating change? If you don't want to see it, you don't move to changing it. You're not acknowledging it. And yet, when the same Pew Research Center study asked blacks and whites and how they were treated, about half of blacks said they'd been treated like they were suspicious or not smart. Look at the gap here. The questions were, people acted as if they were suspicious of you. 47% of African Americans said, yeah, that's happened to me. 10% of whites. People acted as if they thought you weren't smart. 45% of blacks said, yep. 9% of whites. And then we go down to treated unfairly in hiring, stopped by the police, 18 to 3%. Okay. So we just see the racial gaps, not only in the experience, but also in the perceptions. So it's alive and well. And unless it changes, unless the awareness happens, we're not going to see the change. And we see racism at work. This is only 2016. These are the lawsuits that are happening right now. I mean, look at these companies. Okay. So then there's the lawsuits, but then there's these things called microaggressions. And the microaggressions are these slanderous or offensive comments, these subtle put-downs. Okay, it's not legally discrimination, but if you look at some of these things, it's like, why do you sound white? So like, what are you? Are you even legal? Never seen black people do that. So what do you guys speak in Japan? Asian? Okay. So those kinds of questions. It could be, and we see this commonly where it's people going, wow, you're going to college? Well, you're a professor? You must be so ambitious. Good for you. Okay? Good for you. Okay? So what does that do? What does that do to the individual? I call it death by 1,000 paper cuts. You know? It happens every day. And it wears away at your self-esteem, and it creates a negative climate in the workplace or in the community where people say things and they act in ways where it's clear that they're using stereotypes to look at you, stereotypes to judge you, and they think less of you because of your race or your gender or your sexual orientation, your religion. How many people have experienced microaggressions? Raise your hands. Yeah. Yeah. Right. 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 So, you know, so this happens in the workplace, right? This is the climate piece, and this is probably one of the more difficult things for organizations to address, right? Because the person who's doing the microaggression may not even be aware that they're doing it. Wait, I just thought I was complimenting him on his ability to speak English. I thought I was complimenting her on her achievements. What is so sensitive, so sensitive. So let's turn to racism in the workplace. Okay, so you know what we know, some new research. You know, I've got a few interesting little cartoons. You know, I blame EEO laws for making me sound racist at work. Sorry, my clients don't like the color of your tie. You know, okay. There are direct effects of racism. There's been quite a bit of research that's looked at what happens when people experience racism. And it's a stressor. Those who experience racism suffer psychological consequences related to mental health and well-being. They're more likely to experience psychological distress and anxiety, depression. They have lower life satisfaction, happiness, quality of life. Okay? And racism is bad for your health because, again, it's a stressor. Those who experience discrimination are more likely to have cardiovascular disease, hypertension, high blood pressure, respiratory infections, sleep disorders, nausea, pain, headaches, all these factors that are associated with stress. Okay. So there's been a lot of research out there that's looked at the direct effects of racism directly on individuals. So what we wanted to look at is more the indirect effects, because this research has been going on for a while. And we're really kind of frustrated sometimes with organizations that aren't moving forward as quickly as we'd like to make some changes. And part of us, sometimes we think, well, is it just because they really don't care about the targets of the racism? Well, what if everybody was affected by it? What if the majority was affected by it? Maybe that would be a nice business case that would create change. So that's what the two studies look at. Looking at racism, okay, so the target. Well, it looked good on my laptop at home, but this is a Mac to a PC thing. And the bystander effect. And the bystanders are individuals who witness or are aware of racial discrimination in the workplace or racial harassment in the workplace. So we have two studies. One is what's called the Secondhand smoke study, which looks at the effects of being aware of racial discrimination in the workplace. And the second study I want to share with you tonight is another study that we've done that looks at the spillover of community diversity climate to the workplace. What happens when you live in a community that has a discriminatory climate, and then you go to the workplace. As an organizational psychologist, IO psychologist, and as an organizational scholar, I'm interested in the workplace issues, so that's why we're looking at this. Okay, so let's start with secondhand smoke. Ambient discrimination, to define it, is that you're aware of discrimination that happens in the workplace. Okay? Now, it could be that you see it, okay? You could witness it, but a lot of times discrimination happens behind closed doors. So you could hear about it, okay? It could be that it's jokes and emails, okay? Those people say something and there's a joke and you're like, oh, really? Or you get these email jokes that go through and you're just, this is really offensive, okay? It could be graffiti and nooses. And in the US, for a while, we had this incidence of people putting nooses in the workplace. And nooses have a lot of symbolism in the US because of the lynching of African Americans in the South in the early 20th century, and all the way up through the 1960s, actually. Okay. So, when you think about times you've been in a workplace, or even in a classroom or a community environment where you've witnessed or experienced ambient racial discrimination. Somebody said a joke, or you got an email. I mean, my reaction is something like this. I'm like, oh my God. It's just like, it's a stressful reaction. Okay. So we looked at this. And in a study that just came out in Personnel Psychology, my colleagues Kyle Earhart, Karen Linus, Diane Murphy, and John Catman, and we surveyed over 3,800 alums of two universities, the Midwestern University and University in the Northeast. And again, as students, you'll be alums. When you get emails asking you to fill out surveys, please do. Please do. This is the good stuff. Okay. So it's the surveys and also 557 employed adults in the US. And we asked them if they had experienced ambient racial discrimination at work. And we found that those who experienced ambient racial discrimination at work were less committed to their organization. They were more likely to report that they had missed work because of stress. They had experienced more physical symptoms of stress on the job. Tummy aches, palpitations, sweaty palms, upset tummies. But the interesting thing about it is that these negative effects occurred for both whites and people of color. That's why we call it the secondhand smoke effect. And this was, I think, is really just a critical piece. That it's a toxic environment that affects everyone. Okay. Now, you guys know that I'm a mentoring scholar. So, you look at these findings and you think, okay, well, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? Organizations can regulate behaviors, but not the microaggressions. How do we help people? And so I'm interested in mentoring, so I thought, well, maybe mentors could buffer. Maybe the mentoring relationships can help. Because mentors are people who have advanced experience and knowledge, who take a personal interest in a protege. They're there to help you, they care about you, they support you. How many people here have a mentor, have had a mentor at some point in their life? Yeah. Well, then think about that person. You can be thinking about that person. It can be formally assigned or informal. And they care about you. So I thought, well, let's look to see if these mentoring relationships buffer. And we found, in fact, that people who had mentors were buffered. So those who didn't have mentors and experienced ambient racial discrimination experienced all of these negative effects of insomnia and stress, lower organizational commitment. But if you had a mentor, you were less likely to experience the effect. It buffered. Okay? So we thought that was really interesting. And even formally assigned mentors were able to buffer if they were high-quality relationships. So the quality of the relationship was really critical. So that this is really an important piece. And then in our second study, we asked why, and we found out that mentors buffered by providing what's called holding behaviors. And holding behaviors are kind of like arms around experience, like containment, like this is a safe space. So people report that with my mentor. We asked people to report on whether their mentor provided a safe space, whether the mentor validated their experiences, whether their mentor helped them, gave new perspectives. So the mentors provided these holding behaviors. But so we also asked them, we thought, well, what about supervisors and coworkers? Can they buffer people from the negative effects of ambient racial discrimination? And we found, no, mentoring is unique. I mean, we asked people to report on their supervisors and closest coworkers and said, do these, think of your supervisor. Does your supervisor validate your experience? Can you go to this person when you're stressed out? Do they provide a safe environment, close coworkers? And we found that supervisors and close coworkers did provide holding behaviors. In fact, close coworkers gave as many holding behaviors as mentors, but they weren't effective. They didn't buffer. There was only mentoring that buffered, and I think that's kind of important. So coworkers and supervisors can't take the place of mentors. Mentoring relationships are really unique and special. And we even looked at, well, sometimes supervisors are mentors. People say it's my supervisor, but that supervisor is also my mentor. And if they thought their supervisor was their mentor, that person buffered. So I thought that was really kind of important. I mean, there's two key pieces to the study, and one is that ambient racial discrimination affects both whites and people of color. And the second was, okay, what do you do about it? Well, these mentoring relationships really seem to be effective. So, I mean, the big piece is organizations need to get rid of racism. We know this, okay? This is the big piece, okay? But it's a challenge to change attitudes. Sometimes people engage in racist behaviors without even being aware of it. And then you've got the microaggressions thrown in there for good measure, and employees may not even be fully aware of their racism. So mentors can be like triage, okay? Mentors can be triage. They can provide the support and empathy and perspectives to help employees cope. It's something that organizations can do, and even formal mentoring relationships, if it's high quality. So, our next step is saying, okay, so what does the mentor do to change this? Now that the mentor does the holding behavior, so the employee's like, God, I can't believe I heard this, or I saw this happened. And they go to the mentor's like, well, okay, you could talk to me about it. Let me give you, some perspective. It's a safe place. Well, then does the mentor then perhaps do some change, be a change agent? That's our next step. Okay, so that was kind of our first study, looking at racism within the workplace and the secondhand smoke effect. The second study looks at life spillovers. And the life spillover idea is, it's a holistic model, which is that the experiences that happen to you in one domain change you and carried it with you into other domains. So oftentimes when we think about work and non-work, or work and life, we talk about work and family, right? We think of non-work as being family. But there's more things that happen outside the workplace than just family. There's lots of things that happen in your community, okay? So there are things that can change you. So for example, if you're gay and you're not out at work, and you know there's a hate crime against gays in your community, or you see some particularly awful graffiti, it changes you. And you go to the workplace and you may not come out. You may decide not to come out. Or you could be in the workplace and a coworker could come out if you're straight. If you're straight, you know, say you're Archie Bunker in the workplace and your coworker comes out and says, you know, that I'm gay, and you're like, okay, and then there's some education that happens here, and you're like, okay, okay. Then you go home, and then your daughter comes out, and you're like, okay, I think I could work with this. Okay, so this is the piece that there's experiences, there's personally meaningful life experiences that change us. They could be positive experiences, they could be negative experiences, they could be shocks, they could be roles, they could be relationships that happen in one life domain, either the workplace or the home, and they change you, and that change kind of you carry that with you into other life domains. It can change our perceptions, our values, our cognitions and beliefs, and we carry it across our life domains. So this holistic model kind of drove the second study, which looked at community diversity climate. And the idea being, okay, let's look at what the climate is in the community. Because organizations, at least in the US, are not getting that involved in the community. I mean, we had Ferguson, we've got all this stuff going on in the US, and companies are like, not my problem. But it's their employees in the community. And so they're assuming that everything that happens outside the workplace door stays outside the workplace door. That you've got all this stuff in the community, and you're expected to leave it outside the workplace door when you come into the workplace. But interestingly enough, I mean, they're not saying that about family, right? Now they're all realizing, yeah, work, family, okay, you know, we want to be a family-friendly workplace because we recognize that family comes into the workplace goes into the family, we get that, but then that's it. But there's other things as well. So our next study looked at the community diversity climate and the spillover to the workplace. So we look at the community climates from the past, you know, these are reflections from the past. And the present. Not a lot, actually. I think it's going even worse, actually. Okay. And it continues. Black Lives Matter for target practice. Yeah. Hang in there, Obama. White Lives Matter, right? Then we got this guy. He doesn't make it any, he doesn't help at all. So how does the community react to this? I mean, there's the good. I mean, the Not in Our Town initiative, for example, started in a little town called Bozeman, Montana in the US. And it's a small little town, mountain community. And they had some hate crimes. People started writing graffiti against Native Americans, on garages. And then a brick was thrown through a 9-year-old boy's bedroom window because he had a menorah in the window. It landed on his bed. Didn't hurt the kid because he wasn't in bed. But if he would have been in bed, it would have got hurt. He would have been hurt. And at that point, the community said, not in our town, no more. So they organized marches and vigils, had community meetings, but they also did something kind of interesting and creative. They made printouts of menorahs, and they put menorahs in everyone's windows to show the solidarity. So that started the Not in Our Town movement, which also went to the Not in Our Workplace, which was essentially saying, for every act of hate, we counter that with an act of solidarity and say, not in our town. This doesn't reflect who we are. This isn't what we're about. You know, and this was, so you have communities that do this. Well, and then you have some that don't, that kind of revel in it. So there's a lot of diversity in community diversity climate. Some communities are better than others. So we looked at this, and we had a national sample of over 2,000 accounting professionals in the US. We used survey research. And what we wanted to look at was the climate in the community. So we asked them questions like, my community would be a place where people would want to move, people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds would want to move to my community is accepting of people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, and a Likert scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree, right? So we had them assess their community diversity climate. And what we thought was that if you were in a climate that had a bad diversity climate, you'd want to leave your community. You want to get out, right? You want to leave your community, you're going to want to leave your workplace. So that's how that would work, okay? And we actually found that for both whites and respondents of colors. And we were surprised to find that for whites, but the findings were robust. So the diversity climate in the community predicted the moving intentions. And the moving intentions leaving the community in turn predicted work turnover intentions, job search behaviors, and also our physical symptoms at work measure that we love to use, which is, you know, upset tummy, stress, heart palpitations, okay? So it was a spillover effect for both whites and people of color. Okay? Now, the effect of climate was stronger for people of color than whites, but it was still significant for whites. And since we were looking at moving intentions, the intentions to leave your community, even though we had a sample that was all accounting professionals, so that kind of held constant occupation and somewhat socioeconomic status, we still asked questions about household income. We still controlled for whether you owned your own home. We still controlled for whether your partner was working or not. All these things could affect your ability to leave your community. So we controlled for all these things, per capita income of the residential zip code, all that. We still found this effect. For both whites and people of color, when they lived in communities that had bad climate, they wanted to get the heck out of town, leave their community, leave their workplace. Okay. So that was one thing we looked at, the diversity climate. Well, we also want to look at the racial composition in the community, because we know that there's all this research on white flight. You heard about the white flight research, right? That as communities get more diverse, white folks move, right? It's called the white flight phenomenon. It's mostly sociologists and geographers who study this. Okay? So we're learning a new literature as organizational psychologists and whatnot. So we wanted to look at that as well, the racial composition. Did that make a difference? And we found that it did, but only for whites. Okay? So whites who lived in communities that were different from them were more likely to want to leave their community and leave the workplace. And we looked at zip codes, so we were able to look at, and we looked at not just whites, but Asians, African Americans, Latino Americans, the four main groups, and you could look at the proportion of, so for example, Asian Americans in the community versus the total number of groups in the community, and then that would give you your indicator of whether you were living in a diverse community that was different from you or not. Okay? So in line with the racial segregation and white flight research, whites who lived in communities that were more dissimilar to them wanted to leave the community and then leave their workplace, the white flight. For people of color, all the groups, it didn't matter. And we think perhaps it's because they were accounting professionals, so they may have moved to white communities for the schools or for the other kinds of services. But for whites, the more diverse the community was, the more that they were the only white in their community, or a few whites in the community, the more they wanted to leave the community and leave the workplace. So this is kind of what we found. Community diversity climate predicted moving intentions, which in turn predicted turnover intentions, job search behaviors, and work stress for both whites and people of color. Okay? And the racial dissimilarity community predicted moving intentions, which predicted work turnover intentions, job search behaviors, and work stress, but only for whites. But then we found something that really was encouraging and blew us away. We found that community diversity climate moderated this relationship, which means that whites who were in communities where they were the only white, very few other whites, but the community had a good diversity climate, they wanted to stay. They didn't want to leave. Okay? So, you know, the effects of the racial composition of the community affected whites, but if the community was a good climate, it made them want to stay. And this is important. This is really important, because how do you change racism? How do you get rid of racism? You get rid of racism by positive social contact. So we know this. We've been studying this for years. It's positive social contact that changes attitudes. That's the strongest predictor of attitudinal change. But if we live in communities that are racially segregated, if you live in a community where everyone's just like you, you're not going to have that contact. The only contact you're going to have with people who are different will be probably the workplace, which is some point I'll return to later. So, you know, we don't want white flight. Okay, and that's one thing that, you know, it's always been a disturbing piece is white flight. It's like, okay, how do we change attitudes if every time the community gets more diverse, white folks just leave, you know? That's just not going to work. But if the climate is positive, then they may stay. They may build the community together. So this to us was really very encouraging. So racial diversity community predicted moving intentions for white, but this effect was diminished when the community was also inclusive. So again, the importance of diversity climate. And you know, the geographers, even the sociologists who have examined white flight, haven't looked at the climate in the community. So this was a contribution to that literature as well. So what are the implications for organizations? Let's move into the last section of the talk, which is implications. What do we do? Implications for organizations, well, you know, you're embedded in communities. So, you know, if there's a bad diversity climate in your community, then that's going to affect both your white employees, your employees of color, your ability to retain and attract talent. I mean, it's a business case, right? We want the ethical case. We want the social justice case, but organizations oftentimes respond to the business case. We got this case. We got this case, okay? This particular study has got national press. It won a bunch of awards, so it's been out there, and it's just been really gratifying. I actually presented the results to a group of CEOs, Harley Davidson, Manpower, Allied Health, and others in Milwaukee, and it was just, you know, this is, you know, we have to do something about our community. We have to. Climate matters within and outside the workplace. You can't just talk about, well, let's make a better climate, let's work about the diversity climate in the organization and ignore outside the organization, because people live in both places. So you need to partner with your communities, create opportunities for positive intergroup contact, take a stand against hate, okay? When there are hate crimes in the community, when things happen in the community, don't just sit back and go, oh, that's too bad. Take a stand against it. Work with the community to try to help. And it comes down to equality in income, education, political power. Deeper change is needed. That's what it speaks to. So that's the, you know, one part, implications for organizations. There's other implications of both studies. The toxicity of racism affects everyone. So it's not just people of color, it's white folks as well. Community climate affects all groups. This is a secondhand smoke effect. And positive social contact is the key for changing attitudes. So how do we create this? How do we make this happen? You know, that's our job. If you have residential segregation, it's a challenge. And if the workplace is diverse, I mean, the workplace may be the place where people interact with more diverse people than anywhere else. In many communities, that's the case. So this is a great opportunity for organizations to use the workplace as a place for people learning about each other, the differences, appreciating the differences, having positive social contact, dispelling myths, education and learning. So this is just, I mean, it's a tremendous opportunity. And finally, the personal responsibility for creating change. You know, we can sit back and say, oh man, this is awful. All the stuff that's going on, this is awful. But what are we doing about it? You know, the first step is awareness and education. The first step is opening your eyes. And you know, sometimes opening your eyes may be the most painful thing you ever have to do. You know? In my diversity class, I've been teaching diversity in organizations since 1996, for a long time. And students, probably close to 2,000 students now. And really opening eyes and getting people aware of hidden racism, homophobia, attitudes, prejudice against all different types of groups, size, disability, religion, sexual orientation, age, the whole gamut. You know, getting people aware of the stereotypes they have, the reactions, getting them thinking about this. It's the first step to change. But it's not just awareness. We have to speak up. And I love this quote by Martin Luther King. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So I have to share with you now, as we come to a close, a personal experience that happened a few days ago. It was Friday, this last Friday, and I was in Hyde Park, okay, right by the Henry Moore Arch. And it was just this gorgeous day. You guys remember Friday? It was like sunny, beautiful, and it was just like, literally the birds were singing. Spring was in the air, flowers blooming, and I'm from Wisconsin, so I was like, oh, I was like in heaven. So I'm walking around the park going, oh my God, this is so beautiful. Just like taking it all in and just like feeling the sunshine, and it was like kind of this blissful state. Looking at, the Henry Moore Arch, and then I looked to find a place to sit, and I found this. And I looked at this. You guys can all see it? And I thought, my first reaction was, oh my God, if you're Italian and you're walking by and you see this, how would you feel? And then I thought, oh my God, misogyny too. And then I started thinking about little children walking by. Mommy, what does that word mean? Right? And then I thought about 9 or 10-year-olds walking by going, okay, I guess I could be cool and start talking like this too. High school kids walking by. Yeah, I'm already bullying, and this kind of reinforces it. Yeah, right. That's right. Get out of the UK. Get out, get out, get out. And how long it had been there. And the damage that was done. The poison, that this piece that was so poisonous. So I took a photo, that photo, and went back to, Fran's house on campus, and I got my laptop open, and I Googled Hyde Park, Park Administration, and I got the email. So I sent the email. Dear Hyde Park administrators, attached you'll find a photo that was taken in your park by the Henry Moore Arch on Friday. I'm sure the park does not condone this type of message. I look forward to having you remove this graffiti and bench immediately. And I ask that you respond to this email and acknowledge it and let me know your next course of action. Okay, I've done this before. You can't just send the photos, because some administrator will go, oh, that's awful, huh? You have to say, are you condoning this? You have to say, here's what I want you to do about it. Tell them what you want them to do, the action item, what you want them to do. And then you have to tell them, and I will follow up forever. I will follow up forever, okay? You can run, but you can't hide from me. I sent it Friday night. I got an email Monday morning. They said the bench was removed. It took a few minutes to do. It took no time to do. So that's something to think about as we move forward. That you think, how can I make a difference? It's just one email at a time. It's one relationship at a time. It's one eye contact and smile at a time when you're seeing someone who's being clearly the other in a room and being like feeling uncomfortable, and just one smile, one eye contact, one connection at a time. And that's what it takes, we take bigger things, and yes, we are allies and advocates, and we can march and we write our congressmen and we do all these things too, but we could do just the basic things to make a difference. To confront racism when you see it, to not be quiet, to speak out. And I tell my students this, I said, if you see it, say something. You never ever stay silent. Unless it's a police officer with a gun, then you might want to think about it. Okay, officer, why are you pulling over this man? Okay, well, maybe let that one go, or not, but just be prepared for the consequences. But every other time, excuse me, why are you serving me and not him? Excuse me, I heard that comment, and it's really just, it's so offensive to me. It's like, it hurts me to hear this kind of comment. It hurts me to hear what you're saying. Who can argue with that? Who can say, no, it doesn't hurt you? Of course. Making that kind of connection. Taking that personal responsibility, not as something you'd like to do, but something you have to do every day. And last, I'd like to leave you with some hope from Nelson Mandela. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Okay? Okay. Okay, so let's open it up now to your reactions, to experiences, to dilemmas you might have. We could solve them together, to questions.
If you just could raise your hands and I'll bring the mic to you.
Don't be shy. Little did you know when you said this that you'd have to do like a step.
Thank you very much for that. I hate to be the first person to ask a question about Donald Trump, but I will.
Of course.
I've been thinking a lot and talking with colleagues here and elsewhere about the effect that Donald Trump may have had. You know, you showed some spikes in reports of hate crimes and so on. Actually, I was thinking about diversity in the workplace. I was imagining colleagues working in D&I in US corporations trying to do this stuff, and at the same time, the background of all this has been Trump's election. And just wondering if you had any observational thoughts or comments about the impact of what's been going on politically, the diversity climate in organisations.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you, this has been some of the darkest days, some of the worst days, some of the most depressing days, I mean, for many of us in the US. I think there's two pieces, and one was shock, depression, anger, depression, and more depression. But then, what we're also seeing is a resurgence of people speaking up, doing rallies. We're seeing demonstrations on campus. I mean, I'm just loving the demonstrations. I'm going to demonstrations on campus. I love it. So we're seeing more social activism. So whenever you have this hate and this darkness and this ignorance and this awful thing, you have the counterbalance. So in terms of, so that's why I see it in the community and I see that on the campus. In terms of organizations, I think organizations are just keep themselves a step away from that. But I think that when you've got more hate crimes in the community and you've just particularly with the immigration piece, it's just they need to get involved. They need to make a stand. Universities are, but we need to see more of that. So I think it's hard to find anything positive about it. And I'm an optimist, so I try. But it's a call for action. It's a call for getting off your butt and doing something. It's a call for showing up at the rallies. And it's a call for writing congressmen and the next election and the midterm elections and getting the job done. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, that was great, thank you.
Okay, thanks. And moving to maybe to Canada, yeah. I'm living in Wisconsin. I always tell people Wisconsin is like really close to Canada. Like we could actually see Canada. And we actually talked about moving there, yeah.
You might want to think about moving to Australia as well.
Oh, you're moving to Australia, yeah.
I wondered about your assumption that organisations can't mitigate what you referred to as microaggressions.
Okay.
And I think that's maybe problematic in a way. So if we take the analogy of sexist behaviours, so everyday sexism or those low-level put-downs that happen to women all the time, I don't think they're qualitatively different to real, or let's say unlawful sexism, which might be sexual harassment, sex discrimination, predatory behaviour and so on. I think they're really all part of the continuum, and I think there's actually a lot organisations can do about the whole spectrum or continuum of behaviours, be they racist or sexist.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that they should, and I think that's part of it through diversity training. My point was more of the, wow, you're so articulate reaction, okay? Of a microaggression that really is, as opposed to nice legs. So, both of those are microaggressions, but that's more macro and that's more micro. And I think you're right. I think organizations need to do and can do more, particularly with the training. But some of it is so subtle. And you know what I'm talking about. It's the mansplaining in meeting, that's really a good idea, that maybe this man would like to raise it so we could hear it, that happens. And the responsibility for changing that, I think, is with everyone in the room. Okay? So we can look at organizations like, well, organizations need to do something about this. And I'm like, yeah, well, what about the guy sitting next to you? Okay, when he heard that.
He is the organization.
Yeah, yeah. Well, both. I mean, there's both. I mean, there's the leadership of the organization in terms of what that has the power to do things. There's in terms of the training, but then it's also in terms of the collective responsibility of everyone there. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you. I found this interesting. I was wondering if you could clarify what you meant by buffer. You know, when you said that meant as buffer the effects. And the other kind of question linked to that is it really good that they buffer?
Yeah.
If every one of us is responsible for changing this, then shouldn't I just act on my anxiety and go to my manager and say, look, I've seen this email, I don't like that.
Right. So yeah, so that's the other point is that, well, there's, it's the buffer effect. What does that do? Is it stopping change from happening? Are you going to the safe mentor? And people did go to their supervisors and did go to their close coworkers, but didn't feel any better afterwards. Okay, it didn't help. Okay, it didn't help for them to do that. Possibly, and we would like to look at this a little bit more, because perhaps the discrimination occurred in that particular environment. It could have occurred with the supervisors or with the coworkers too. So the question is, the mentor buffer effect, what exactly does it do? Does it really make any change happen, or does it actually keep people, well, I'm safe here? That's why I called it a triage. It's a triage effect. So it's not a panacea, and it's not a cure, and the implications are to eradicate racism. But the fact of the matter is that mentors are helping, and they're helping people not just with racism, they may be helping with other things as well. So that's a relationship. I think it's important to recognize that it exists, because sometimes we ignore the impact of relationships in organizations and how important that they can be. I don't know if I answered your question, though. Did I get to it?
I don't know. It was an open question. So.
Okay. Go.
Okay.
Thank you for the lecture. Very good. As a Black American, I'm interested in your perspective on how do you introduce these conversations or this initiative to organizations. Being a part of, in my personal experience, with organizations, this information you presented outside of the data is very much an experience and an understanding. And oftentimes your voice, perhaps in my personal experience, the only Black person in the organization or in any type of level of management. Yeah. So presenting this information to management or as an initiative is quite difficult from my voice. So I'd just like to hear it.
So the question is, I don't know if everyone heard it, was that how do you create change? How do you present this to management? And it's similar in a way for race, for gender, for sexual orientation. The group that's being discriminated against, it's not their responsibility to create the change. And that's where the responsibility needs to shift. It's the other groups, the dominant groups in whatever area it is. I mean, the dominant group shifts depending on the type. It could be a shift in terms of race or sexual orientation or religion. It's their place to raise this as an issue. It's their place to say, wait a second, this is wrong. It's their place to say, we need to create this change. We need to make this happen. And to work together. Because otherwise it just becomes, oh, it's a women's issue, it's a Black issue, or it's a gay issue, it's just this or that issue. And then it just kind of depletes the power of that as well. But by the same token, you want the groups to work together. So, I think, I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess other people can actually chime in terms of other responses to that too. Yeah. Okay, just pass the.
It just relates to your point of working together. So you outlined to what extent racism creates adverse health effects and mental health issues amongst employees and inside of organizations. Now, following your advice and calling out people for racist behavior or homophobic behavior or sexist behavior ultimately leads to a conflict within the organization, because a lot of the microaggressions are actually dominant or congruent with dominant ideological or organizational practices. So how do you account for that conflict, or how within your research that it emerges, like, oh, you're just, you know, create a troublemaker for raising, you know, racism in the workplace? Or how do you account for it? Oh, don't, you know, play up for those sexist comments. You know, you're just dissatisfied with the business at large or with the organization at large. So I think there's a conflictual element.
Okay, so my hearing is really bad, so you're going to have to, somebody's going to have to reframe this. I'm partially deaf in both ears, so you need to talk up a little bit more. Thank you.
Okay. So just to keep it really brief.
Okay, good.
So there's an element of conflict in following the advice you outline. So if you're calling out racism or sexism or homophobia within the workplace, how do you account for that conflict or that potential conflict that arises from the kind of suggestions?
Okay, yeah. You know, this is interesting, because we've seen this happen, and whenever you raise issues with respect to race or privilege or discrimination, the first reaction is people saying, no, that's not true. You're too sensitive, getting angry, blaming you, not wanting to see the privilege. Because if they look at their own privilege, then they're going to come face to face with the idea that they got where they got, not necessarily because they deserved it. And basically, that's hard for people to kind of get their heads around. Okay, so you as a change agent, we need to recognize that if you raise issues with respect to discrimination, both the overt type and the microaggressions, that you're going to get pushback. That people are going to say, you've got another agenda, you're too sensitive, or assuming that you're a member of that group. Okay, you know, I mean, if you do advocacy for LGBT, people go, oh, I didn't know you were gay. Well, I'm not gay. Then, well, why are you speaking up then? I mean, it's just, so that kind of piece. So I think what needs to happen as change agents, it can be very, it can wear you down to make that change, okay? So what needs to happen is you need to have groups that support each other to move forward. So having one person raise it isn't going to be as effective as having groups that raise this and at multiple levels. One of the issues I think that happens that's even more distressing, I think, is that people give up and leave the organization. They go, you know, I've tried and I failed and I'm going to leave. Good luck, everyone. It's like the Titanic is sinking there, okay? You know, goodbye, I got a lifeboat, I'm out of here. Good luck with this. And then the change agents leave because they're tired of bashing their head against the wall for an organization that's just not ready to change yet. So then what do you do in that situation? And that's, I think, even worse than the conflict, because the conflict is natural. And the conflict, if you keep the lines of communication open, can lead to like learning and growth. You know, this conflict's not bad. It's only if it's not resolved and it gets personal that it gets bad. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, you did, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good. Yeah. And then oh, wait, we had a question over here. I know you've been trying to. He's been. Okay. Good. Wait, I got to come over so I can hear.
I wanted you to perhaps give us some advice.
Advice. Okay.
Since 1994, I've been in HEIs, Higher Education Institutes. I have not found any change in the diversity of people sitting in the top of organizations.
Mm-hmm.
In the early 90s, it was 80% of others.
Right.
It is now less than 5%.
Yeah.
I've also seen over the years, every time we have a major strategy, so we have the REF coming, and we have the TEF coming now, there is a push to increase diversity.
Right.
There is then lip service to it within organisations, and as soon as that's over, it goes. Also, we do huge amount of diversity training, and if you look at the people who are here today, they are people who bought into it, right? At QMR now, everyone has to do unconscious bias training, which is a huge joke. They use the Harvard
Implicit association test,
and that's it. But there is no change in the organizational behaviors at all. So how do you advise us to change that?
God, I wish I had the answer to this question, you know? Honestly.
At the top of the organization, look how many people are here.
Yeah. You know, I wish I had the answer to that question, because it's a question we see with the glass ceiling. It hasn't changed. It's like glacial. It's like glacial in terms of change. But let me bring out a couple things that could possibly address that. At its core, I think people are. I'm a psychologist, so at the core, people are uncomfortable with people who are different from them. That's kind of a basic human kind of piece, okay? That you're uncomfortable with people who are different from you. So how do you get around that? How do you make that change happen? You know, and I'm committed to education. I'm committed to, I think that the change can happen on college campuses. I think that the change can and should happen. This is what we need to do as educators. I think that diversity training in organization, I've done diversity training. I was a diversity consultant for a while, and then I said, no, this is not working. Because they don't really want you to do it. They want you to come in for like 2 hours or 3 hours and do something nice, and that's not going to change attitudes, you know. But doing diversity courses, like my diversity course is 16 weeks of diversity training. And it's like the students are immersed in it. They hear guest speakers from every group sharing. They go into the community and do all kinds of experiences, experiential exercises, and at the end, they change. And I think it's up to the universities, and even earlier, to make that change happen. Because I don't think workplaces are doing that. And you know, it's kind of interesting, because it's my pet theory here that we know that organizations that do better with diversity make more money than those who don't. But there's like this kind of ceiling effect where everybody's doing so crappy at it that they can still do well in the marketplace because their competitors are also doing really badly at it. You know? I mean, so there's no incentive for them to move beyond their comfort zone. Now, there are some companies that are doing an amazing job, and it takes a leader who makes that happen. And I do think it's the top down a little bit more. I know people talk about the bottom up. I know we could talk about both. I don't want to argue about which is better, top down or bottom up. But it needs to have that change happen, and then it could be fleeting. It could be like that, and then gone. So you talk to people from companies, they go, yeah, I work in this organization. It's listed as the best place for such and such to work. And let me tell you, it isn't. You know, because the other piece is that it's your group around you. There are microclimates. So you can have a work group that could be really accepting and good, or a work group that could be awful. But we're just not seeing the change in terms of the diversity and the leadership, and in terms of the top levels. And until that happens, we're not going to see the change. And I wish I had an answer for that. I know they talk about the quotas, but there's the pushback with respect to that. So let's open this up. What are some, I don't have the answers. What do you think? What are some answers? What are some things we could do to address this? Because this is a key question.
So when there was, I was on a group, and we asked all the HEI heads, or heads above a certain level, in London, to do unconscious bias, just for them to have a look at themselves. Very, very few took it up. Wow. They went back to the universities and started implementing it, right? But the change will never come while you have that crystal peak, right? And have no colours in it, no ageism, no sexism, no different people in there. It is never ever going to change. And I think it's very, very sad when you look and you have 20, 30 years of people paying lip service and not doing anything. Yeah. And I think the only thing will come is, as you say, is the pushback has to come from wonderful young people who are here today, because those people at the top are not going to do anything for you at all.
Yeah. So it's up to you guys, okay? The future's up to you. You, that's you. I'm talking to you there, okay? You, I'm talking you. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that he was next.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you, Professor Belle Rose. I myself am an academic here. I was the victim of microaggression, and I have seen a number of my colleagues in other universities that are victims. And your findings really echoes my experience. And also I had a mentor. That mentor was a professor of another university, and she did a wonderful job. And she built up my immunity, resisting power, and it really helped. And I was able to overcome this situation, got my promotion, and also got a Times Higher Education shortlisting. So I'll say it was my privilege to hear this talk. And also I thank the management department here who invited Professor Belle Rose here. And I also want these summary findings should be emailed to the whole university. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, this, honestly, I think as a mentoring scholar, I think that diverse mentoring relationships can be such a powerful source of learning and growth. I believe in the power of relationships. I think relationships are an important place for social change that we really don't look at as much as we need to. But I've seen this in mentoring relationships, and I've seen this in close relationships, where people say, let me share my experiences with you. This is my reality. This is what I'm experiencing. And I found this in my students when I had them do interviews with the difference, where they have to interview someone who's in a non-dominant group who has faced discrimination. It could be someone with a disability, in a religious minority, sexual orientation, race, a variety of different things. And they talk, and they write up their essays, and they share them in class, and they talk about the learning that happened just in that kind of interviewing and sharing of information. And the awareness, like, wow, I just never thought about this before. And that's, I think, a real, we talk about how change happens, and I think it does happen at the relational level. And I think we need to capitalize on that. And in organizations, can we change the structure, the power structure, the political systems? That's a big job, but we can change one-on-one the relationships that we have. We can reach out, and there's nothing to keep us from reaching out and talking to people who are really different from us and hearing their story and getting their perspective and understanding where they're coming from, giving them empathy and learning about it, and then passing that learning forward. I mean, and that, I think, is just, it's a great way for social change to happen. So, I'm passionate about that.
I had a question that's based on a recent experience after the Trump immigration ban.
Yeah.
And so I became really interested in how organizations were responding to the ban. And some organizations were very clear in terms of saying this is essentially wrong and bad and against our values. Right. And other organizations, they were quite hesitant around stating their values and or stating whether it was even a values issue, in fact, as opposed to a policy issue. And one of the things that really kind of I was lucky to be part of the conversation, and so I heard a lot of different individuals responding. And there were some folks who said, well, hang on a second, don't my values count too? And I don't think there's anything wrong with the ban. Yeah. And so then leaders are in this situation where where almost like they have to take sides. Yeah. And I found it really interesting, and I don't have an answer, or I don't really even have a question. I just wanted to know your thoughts on, are leaders being forced to make these kinds of tough decisions, and how should they go about doing that when they want to respect all of the employees in the organization, not just the ones who maybe share my personal beliefs, but also other people's personal beliefs.
This is a bigger issue in terms of the greater good. And we see this in the diversity arena a lot in terms of a practical perspective. People saying, well, it's my values or it's my religious beliefs not to work with someone who's gay. Okay, so my religious beliefs are just that being gay is bad, so I don't really want to work with this person because they're gay, so what about my values too, and then how do we deal with that disconnect? And it's very similar to the situation of someone saying, well, my values are that the immigration ban is fine, and somebody else's, and how do we deal with this? I think the first answer to the first question is always, does it hurt other people? The harm that it inflicts, and the greater good. I mean, that's the piece. The answer to the question of the immigration ban is more complex. I think as leaders, they need to be able to listen to, not assume, and to be able to listen to both perspectives. I think perspective taking is probably one of the most critical skills that a leader can have in terms of saying, this is what I think, what do you think? Let me listen to what these different perspectives are. But ultimately, I think it comes down to the greater good. I think it does. For me, it comes down to the greater good. And you know, and it's interesting because I watched my university take a firm stand against the immigration ban. And I saw my chancellor send out emails saying, this is wrong, we think it's wrong, and we're supporting our community. And I saw that happen at my university. And then in my professional association, I saw them really struggling with how to go about Academy of Management. Watched them struggle, and many of us in the room watched them struggle with how to go about dealing with that. So you watch these different approaches, and then you think, well, there are people who are making these decisions. So there's another piece here. Let's think about this. Let's take a step back. As management scholars, organizational scholars, we're training those leaders, right? We're training those managers, right? Do we talk about this in class? Sometimes, yeah, sometimes, yeah, good. Good, then that's exactly what we do. So laying it out as a dilemma, saying, here's the issue, how would you deal with it? What are the issues? Having them think about it, and think about it before they get out there into the workplace. So I think it's our responsibility as educators to be a step in front of these kinds of issues as they emerge. And to help, because we talk about, well, what are leaders doing? Well, we're training them, right? So we better get on the ball. Yeah. Other.
Yeah, the question here. Now the EU agreed a directive about big enterprises reporting non-financial and diversity information, which came into implementation in December 2016. So my question is, are there any standard criteria to judge how well an organization do on diversity, just like accounting standards?
Okay, so the question is, are there standards to judge how well organizations do with respect to diversity?
Yeah.
Oh, well, in the US, I think there are some. We look, like, for example, Catalyst does a census ranking of women in corporate boards and women in positions of corporate suite. So they do the census of publicly held firms and they rank them in terms of how well they're doing. I think that's important. I think what gets measured gets done. Yeah. And I think it's important for that accountability. And honestly, let me just take this back a step, because we're talking about organizations here and what organizations should do. Let's talk about educational organizations. What if we had a ranking of universities, and we ranked the universities and business schools in terms of the proportion of women and people of color, people from non-dominant groups who got tenure, who stayed? I mean, we do rankings of universities based on all kinds of things, right? And deans pay so much attention to those rankings. But what if we ranked universities based on how well they do on diversity initiatives in terms of faculty, in terms of administration, in terms of staff? I mean, we can start talking about what organizations should do, but we're in the university. Can we control that? Not really. We don't work in those organizations. We work here. So what are we doing as an organization? What can we do better? Just picture if universities were ranked based on the extent to which they recruited, retained, and promoted non-dominant groups in faculty, as well as administrators. Just think of what that would look like and what an incentive that would be for change. So, when we're thinking about what making change happen, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Yeah. Wait. Sorry. Oh, sorry. There's other. Sorry. I don't know where the mic is. Okay.
I just swim around in this world. I've been on this planet for quite a while. I think I'm fairly educated. I'm not an educator, but I work in the environment, and I'm absolutely appalled at the level of diversity in HEI. I work on the professional services side. I'm not going to say where, except to say I walked into an inner London university expecting to see at least 30% of the professionals in there from Black or African Caribbean or minority ethnic groups. It's not happened. Also in the student base as well, hasn't happened. And certainly in terms of the senior academic leadership in the organisation, generally, certainly quite a significant number of white males and some white females. And as I swim around in the sort of middle management strata, and I'm a temporary member of staff, the micro communities and micro behaviours are about exclusion, about silencing my voice, and about ignoring me. So, I mean, in terms of your research, it spoke about kind of microaggressions, but in our country, we're very good at ignoring people, taking their knowledge and speaking it. If I'm a white male, I'll take a Black female's knowledge and information and speak it as if it's mine. So, in terms of Black professionals, when retrenchment happens, when redundancy comes along, we're highly likely to leave. So in terms of even building the pathways for younger people to come through the system, it is not happening. Tony Blair said it's about education, 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 and you know, I don't believe it anymore. I know people who are educated to the hilt and they're driving kind of, well, they used to drive lots of taxis. I don't know, operate in the kind of grey economy. I think we need to do much better as a country and certainly as a sector at ensuring that there is some kind of pathways within the organisations for people to act in a very diverse way, because we're losing out on talent, sick days are going through the roof. There are all kinds of damages that are happening here. People are going on the training you talk about, you call it
diversity training.
This unconscious bias, tick box exercise. Complete tick box. It has to change because the car's going to crash and the thing's going to grind to a halt. So I say legislation, as they do in America.
This is, okay, so we've got our mandate here, don't we? I mean, we've got our mandate here in terms of we know the problems and we need to sit down and think about what the solutions are. Because you know, we could approach it from organizations being out here, but let's approach it from our educational institutions, because we're responsible for educating and training the future organizational leaders that go out there, and we're not doing a good job in here. And because it's like the basic social psychology of prejudice that occurs, so yeah, education, we know there's a relationship between education and racism, that you're less likely to be racist if you're more educated, but that doesn't mean that educated people aren't racist. I mean, because of the social psychology of prejudice. That's a big piece. So how do we change that? Legislation is the key piece for the first part, but it also needs to change the culture and the climate. And we know that's so hard. I mean, we talk about that in organizations, about changing culture and climate. So how do we do it here? You know, I guess the goal here is to raise more questions than answers, and that's okay. It's okay to have questions here and say, well, here is the problem, and here's what we, you know, we may not have all the answers, but it's good to hear the problems. It opens the eyes. It opens the eyes. So thank you for sharing that.
I'm so sorry.
Are we done?
There is food and drinks waiting outside, so we can continue the conversation maybe outside. And thank you very much to Alicia, who has done